Good evening, everyone. This side MayankRajput from Section E. And today, I'm going to talk about the untapped potential of India's MSME sector. So, for any country's long term growth, what does it need? It needs its small and medium enterprises to grow, and not just the growth potential to realize their growth potential, but also they need some policy incentives so that they can operate freely and expand continuously. So, if we talk about the India's MSME sector, so India is home to over 63 million MSMEs, that is micro, small, and medium enterprises, making it one of the most entrepreneurially vibrant economies in the world. And yet, something is deeply broken at the heart of the story. In this presentation, we will talk about the missing middle case of MSMEs in India and how solving it may be the single most important step towards India's next phase of economic growth. So, what do we have here? So, what is the problem? What do you mean by the missing middle? So, here we can see the structure of India's MSME enterprises. For example, if you look here, the, the structure here is very skewed. For example, in this pyramid, it has a very peculiar shape. At the base, we have an enormous mass of micro enterprises. They make up roughly 99% of all registered MSMEs. And above them, small enterprises comprising of barely 0.7%. And at the top, we have medium sized firms. What is their percentage? A meager 0.3%. So, this sharp drop between the bottom and the top is what we call the missing middle. Medium sized enterprises, the engines which they provide for productivity, employment opportunities, and global competitiveness in most advanced economies are almost entirely absent from India's industrial landscape. Nearly 90% of these MSMEs operate informally, and this data is backed by one of its reports published by Niti Aayog in 2025. Most firms in India never scale up, and that is why their productivity stays low, wages they stay low, and India's competitive potential goes unrealized. Now, so due to this skewed structure, we will talk about the implications. What are the implications of this very rigid, very skewed structure? So as you can see here, this skewed structure actually cost more than what we can really see in the case of India. The implications are staggering across three dimensions. First, if we talk about from the productivity angle, so MSME workers produce only 14% of the output of workers in large firms. And that is not a gap, that is a chasm. It fundamentally limits India's GDP potential. Second, employment quality. So MSMEs employ over 26 crore people, but most of these jobs are low paying, insecure, and informal. And here we are talking about millions of workers trapped in a low productivity cycle with little hope of wage growth. And third, we have economic inefficiency. There is a credit gap of nearly 30 lakh crore, starving MSMEs of the capital they need to invest and grow. Economists call this a low productivity equilibrium, where firms stay small, stay stagnant, and stay inefficient. And this is not a market failure at the margins. It is a structural failure at the core of India's economy. So we know about the problem, but what are the root causes? Why is our MSME sector is not booming or not realizing its potential? So here we will talk about the root causes. Here we will see why do firms stay small? Why don't they grow up and just scale up their economies or scale up their production? So here, to fix the problem, we need to understand, as I mentioned earlier, what are the problems? What are the possible challenges that they face? The first one is regulatory threshold effect. So basically, it means growth penalty. So for example, here we can talk about the moment a firm crosses certain size thresholds, it faces more labor laws, stricter GST compliance, and more inspections and certifications. Growing is punished, so firms stay small on purpose. The second one is the credit gap. As I mentioned earlier in the last slide, only 19% of MSME credit demand was formally met in a 2021 financial year. MSMEs are caught in a financial void, too big for microfinance and too risky for traditional banks. What is the result? As I mentioned earlier, again, a 30 lakh crore credit shortfall that suffocates their growth. The third one is informality trap. Over 90% of MSMEs, they remain informal, with around 35% still unregistered as of 2025. Informal firms cannot access bank credit, cannot participate in government schemes, and cannot tap export markets. Informality is a ceiling, not a floor. And fourth one, here we can see delayed payments and working capital stress. A staggering 8.1 lakh crore is stuck in delayed payments. Large corporates simply not paying MSMEs on time. And this chokes cash flow, prevents their reinvestment, and keeps MSMEs in a constant state of financial stress. So enough talk about what is the problem and what are the root causes. What should be the way forward for India and for Indian government? So here, the good news is that this is a solvable problem. It is not something which we cannot solve. The policy direction is clear. India needs to shift from supporting survival to enabling scale. And there are 5 concrete levers to achieve this. First one is a graduated regulatory framework. Instead of sudden compliance burden at growth thresholds, we have to introduce step-by-step compliance, make growth rewarding, not punishing, streamline labor laws for growing firms. Second one is a scale-up financial ecosystem. And here, we are not just talking about financial incentives, but also we have to use whatever information we have in place. For example, we can employ GST data for cash flow-based lending, promote venture-based debt and MSME equity funds, strengthen SIDBI, which is nothing else but Small Industrial Development Bank Institutions' mandate to become a true engine of MSME finance. Third one is cluster-based industrial growth. What is that? We have to develop sector-specific clusters. For example, labor-intensive industries like textiles and parts, gems, jewelry. We have to integrate MSMEs into global supply chains. Countries like China and Vietnam have shown how effective this model can be. So we can learn something from those models and implement somewhat similar model in our country. Fourth one is formalization with incentives. Rather than forcing formalization, we have to incentivize it. Incentives such as tax breaks for registration, simplified GST for small businesses, compliance support, centers at the district level, etc. And the last one, strict payment discipline. We have to enforce strict payment deadline, for example, the 45-day payment deadline rigorously. Penalize large firms that delay payments to MSMEs. And solving this alone could unlock massive liquidity across the sector. So how should we implement this? What should the implementation roadmap look like? So here, the reforms we talked about, they don't happen overnight. They require a phased, sustained approach, and also policy incentives, as well as the government's push to realize the untapped potential of MSMEs. In the short term, like 1 or 2 years of timeline, we have to simplify GST structure, clear the delayed payments backlog, and reduce redundant compliance and launch compliance support centers, as I mentioned here. The goal is immediate liquidity injection. In the medium term, like for coming up in next 3 or 5 years, we have to focus on structural strengthening. Here, we should aspire to build credit infrastructure through platforms like TREDS, GST-linked lending, and the development of sectoral industrial clusters. SIDBI and CGTMSE mandates must be expanded. And in the long term, over 5 to 10 years, the aspiration is transformation. A robust base of mid-sized firms, improved export competitiveness, and the full integration of MSMEs into global supply chains. The critical point is reform continuity across all 3 phases. Piecemeal or interrupted reform will not be enough. So, in the conclusion, let me close with the what I believe is the most important insight from this analysis. India does not lack entrepreneurs. We have abundance of them, but it lacks scaling enterprises. Solving the missing middle is not just an MSME policy issue. It is about creating better, formal, and higher wage jobs for millions of Indians. It is about closing the 14% productivity gap between small and large firms. And it is about achieving this structural economic transformation that India needs to become a $5 trillion economy and beyond. From a nation of small firms to a nation of scaling firms. This is the transformation India must pursue. Thank you, everyone. Jai Hind.